Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one we are taking a look at some of the best decks for the Hot Location. This one is Hala. So after turn 4, destroy all the cards here for the player that is losing this location. So not a super duper impactful location. You could just choose to ignore it if you want, but there is some fun stuff you can do with it. So let's take a look at the decks we have for this one. Starting off, we have a Pool 1 Zoo deck. Not really too much to say about these Pool 1 decks. They're usually not super duper different due to the limited card pool available in Pool 1. But generally, something like this shell we have here should get the job done. Just a good Zoo deck. A lot of 1-drops, some good 2-drops in Angela, Armor, Scarlet Witch, and Scorpion. I'd say Scorpion and Armor are kind of your tech spots. Armor is obviously kind of nice with the location because we can prevent our stuff getting blown up if that is a thing we're worried about. We shouldn't really have to worry about it though because we have so many 1-drops. We should be able to control the board pretty well and maintain that kind of lead initiative. And then just the higher end, we just have the good Zoo cards in Bishop, Bazaar, and Blue Marvel to kind of buff up off of our board. So pretty simple deck here. You could also get the job done with a Odin on reveal deck. I'm sure that would work just as well, and we have featured a deck like that before many times on these deck showcases. So that's Pool 1, pretty simple stuff. Let's move on to Pool 2. Moving on into Pool 2 here, unsurprisingly we have a Devil Dinosaur deck, as it is probably the best deck in Pool 2 and can even carry you a bit into early Pool 3. Pretty standard stuff here. Instead of leaning into the location on this one, we're kind of leaning against it with our tech cards like Armor and to a lesser extent Cosmo. Just really good at protecting our stuff and getting rid of the potential downside of the location. Other than that, just some generally good cards here. Sunspot, one of the best 1-drops you get access to in Pool 2. Then just a bunch of cards that get more cards in your hand to keep our Dino nice and big. Moon Girl enables double Dino, which is always great. White Queen gives us that information or just an alternate way to win the game. Chavez for that consistency. Storm to lock down a lane, which we can follow up with Jessica or White Queen. Just a generally pretty well-rounded deck that you could probably do a few small upgrades to as you get into Pool 3 and still have a lot of success with. Our other deck for Pool 2 here is another Khazar Zoo deck. This one has a bunch of upgrades compared to the one we are looking at in Pool 1. Generally, the big upgrade here is just other good 1-drops like Sunspot, Iceman, and Korg. And then on top of that, we also get access to Strong Guy, who is a really nice top end, a little bit lower curve. We also have Blade here to help guarantee that we are going to have no hand at the end of the game. So we do get that Strong Guy bonus. And we do have Armor in here as well, both for the location and to generally protect from any wandering Killmongers. Obviously, Killmonger can be kind of problematic for a deck like this that has so many 1-drops, but I find it still manages to be pretty successful even in Pool 3 as long as you can dodge those Killmongers. Right on into Pool 3 here, and above we have Captain Marvel Control. So I've tried out a bunch of different control style decks recently, and this is one of the ones I've been most impressed with. Just has a really solid game plan going on with it, and a nice little destroy package for the early game, and then some big threats to close out the game, such as Rescue, Captain Marvel, and Magneto, as well as some powerful tech cards like Shang-Chi, Killmonger, and Iceman. So generally, we're trying to curve out pretty well with this deck. We do have our little destroy package, Carnage being our main destroy effect, along with Killmonger here. And our destroy targets are generally going to be Nova, Bucky, the Hood, and the Mysterio clones. Bishop gets pretty good value as we're often playing quite a lot of cards. Shang-Chi is some nice emergency tech that can take people by surprise. Rescue is a really good 4-drop, but if you don't have her, you could probably replace her with Jessica Jones and still do alright, plus dodge some opposing Shang-Chis. The Magneto pull at the end of the game can be game-winning sometimes. Other than that, he's just a really big stat stick. And Captain Marvel's flexibility here can be very, very good at keeping the opponent guessing which lane we're going for. Mysterio also helps with that. However, you do have to be a little bit careful with this interaction, as if you have played Mysterio first, his end of game trigger will go off before the, or I guess it goes off, his goes off first, but the Captain Marvel doesn't see the Mysterio reveal. I'm not sure if the order actually changes that or if that's just how the game does it, but that can sometimes screw up your Captain Marvel, so be wary about that. But other than that, I really think this is a super solid and honestly pretty underrated deck in the current meta and for this location. Next up here for our Pool 3 decks is a Cerebro 4 deck. This is a deck I had quite a bit of success with, and I was kind of surprised by it. So Cerebro 5 was one of my favorite archetypes before the nerfs. However, some of the best 5 power cards got lowered to 4, namely Sarah and Mysterio. So tried to build this. Actually have a whole video on it if you want to check out some games with it. But overall, I really love this deck. I think Cerebro 4 is like criminally underrated. It's just a really fun and surprisingly powerful Cerebro deck. A lot of good 4 power cards, and we kind of tempo out pretty well. Like, we have a pretty low curve. More than half of our deck is 2 cost or less. We also have some interesting inclusions that you might not normally expect in a Cerebro 4 deck, such like Ant-Man. Medusa is usually a pretty uncommon one, but can be pretty good. Coulson has been surprisingly an MVP. You might think that, oh, you're getting a random 4 and 5 cost. How are you going to use that in your Cerebro deck? Sometimes he gives us stuff that actually works with Cerebro, and then some of the other times we don't draw Cerebro. So just being able to curve out is pretty good, especially in this style of deck. One card I have noticed underperforming a bit has been Rocket Raccoon, as in Pool 3, a lot of decks aren't playing stuff in the early game. So you could consider swapping this out with something. I think Carnage is a pretty good option, as you can eat things like the Mysterio clone and get it to 4 pretty easily. So that's one possible substitution. You could also put in Carnage in place of Coulson if you want. You do not have Coulson, but I think if you do have him, he is worth running in this deck. Other than that, just a bunch of good 4 cost stuff, or 4 power stuff. Usually save Colleen till the end of the game with Sarah, so we don't actually have to discard anything. Cloak doesn't really have a downside on turn 2 most of the time, which is nice. Mysterio keeps them guessing, and a lot of people do not see the Cerebro coming on this one. Claw is also pretty cool because it gives us another target for Mystique to copy, and people do not expect getting clawed, so that's always really fun when you're able to pull it off. Next up here is our Negative Surfer deck. So Mr. Negative, very, very powerful with Silver Surfer and a bunch of the other 3-drops. I personally think this is one of the best decks in the game. It's not without its counters, but if you can kind of dodge those or play around them effectively, this deck is almost unstoppable with a half-decent draw. Now, we do have one Pool 5 card in here, Bast. You can definitely play this deck without them, but I find Bast is good because they give us a bit more power when we aren't actually drawing our Mr. Negative, or make Mr. Negative himself a little bit less of a liability to have on the board, especially with things like Iron Man. If you do not have Bast, I would consider another 2-drop replacement. I would probably put in Angela, who I had in here before, or Forge. But rest of the cards, pretty standard for a Negative Surfer deck. Just a lot of good 3-cost stuff, and most importantly, these 0 power units that get flipped by Negative. We have 4 of them in the deck. Yeah, we have 4 of them in the deck. Ironheart, Mystique, Surfer, and Iron Man, all very, very powerful when flipped. And then all of our other 3-drops are really good when flipped as well. Bishop gets 3 attack for 1 cost. Rogue is really good in the mirror and against ongoing decks. Wolfsbane is great because we will usually have a lane almost full up. Brood lets us fill up a lane and get a lot of benefit from the tokens with the Surfer. Negative obviously makes our cards ridiculously cheap and powerful. Iron Man, it's not a Negative deck without Iron Man pretty much. And then Sarah. Sarah's cool because she gives us a bit of a backup way to win the game with 3 3-drops on the final turn if we don't draw into Negative. And she's pretty much the only card that doesn't actually care much for the Bast buff, as it shrinks her down a little bit, but small price to pay when it buffs pretty much all the rest of the cards in the deck. I really like this deck. I know negative can sometimes be hit or miss, but for me, I've had a lot of success with it, and this is definitely one of the decks I would consider playing. And we have another upgrade to our Devil Dinosaur deck. Again, this is a version I have been playing quite a bit of, and I think it's one of the best versions of Dino out there right now. Kind of underplayed too, I think, relative to its success, but that might be due to all of the leader going around, as leader is definitely pretty annoying for Dino to deal with sometimes. But we have a few upgrades here, so mainly the big ones here are Quinjet as well as She-Hulk. Now, you don't necessarily need She-Hulk for this, but I find she is really, really good, and she's also the reason we end up packing Sunspot in this deck, as there's great synergy there. Quinjet is really what brings us all together, though, as we're making copies of stuff in our hand, and we can do some pretty busted stuff with it. Not only can we get down Double Dino for even cheaper, but we can do things like Moon Girl on turn 4, pass turn 5, then turn 6, we can potentially get down a free She-Hulk, a copy of it, or the copy's free, a 1-cost She-Hulk. We could play a Dino, we could play a copy of a Doom, because that would only cost 5. It's really, you can do some very, very powerful things on the final turn with this deck. Other than that, just a standard Dino shell. I really do like the kind of Storm Cosmo package here. I think these 3-drops are really, really good in Dinosaur. And White Queen, still seeing a lot of love, and for good reason, because she is the free-to-play queen. You know, if you're missing some good top end, just throw in a White Queen and let the opponent have the top end for you. And worst case, it's just a bit of extra information, so you know what you have to play around. I think Dino is a very solid deck in Pool 3, and if you have the cards, this is the one I would recommend playing. Wouldn't be a best decks video if we didn't have at least one leader in here, as this guy is absolutely terrorizing the metagame right now, and in my opinion, this is probably the best deck for him, and one I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. So this is a deck from KM Best. It's a slight variation on Dira's version of the list. That version ended up having a Leech with leader, as well as the Shang-Chi tech, and this version ends up swapping out those 2 cards for Shuri and Vision. So if you're missing Shuri, you can go do the Leech version, also still very effective, but if you have Shuri, I think this version is really, really sweet, and also just a lot of fun to play. I know leader can definitely be annoying sometimes, but for now, the card is really good. And if you want to win some games, throwing him in your deck is not a terrible idea. The rest of this deck is just a good stuff deck. We are running a lot of the best individual cards in the game, and they're so good we don't necessarily need a whole ton of direct synergy between them. They're just good cards. Scorpion and Thor particularly have really risen a ton in play because of this deck, as well as Maximus. Maximus seeing quite a bit of love now, whereas he used to not really see much play at all outside of Sarah decks. So if you want to just slap a good pile of cards together and win some games, this is probably the route you might want to go. And the final deck we have here for the video is going to be a Valkyrie Thor deck. Now, Valkyrie has quickly become one of my favorite cards in Pool 5. Unfortunately, this isn't a deck where you can really make great substitutions and maintain the idea of the deck, as it is built around Valkyrie, but if anyone out there does have Valkyrie, this is a really cool home for her. So Valkyrie, super unique and powerful card, but you really need to build your deck in the right way to fully leverage this effect, but it can be game winning when you do so. So this is kind of a tempo style deck, but we are trying to play from behind. So we have the Hood here, who really helps us with that, helps give the opponent initiative, as we don't have a way to get rid of the Hood. We're totally fine with him sticking around, as he gives us food for our Valkyrie lane, and just helps make sure that the opponent is ahead on the final turn so that we can get full Valkyrie value to win the game. Now, we do need some effects that break the Valkyrie tie. So we have some good ongoings here, like Ant-Man and Mojo. Sunspot can also break the tie here if you have him in the lane before you play down the Valkyrie, as he'll get pumped up by 1 at the end of the turn. Armor, just some pretty good tech, also helps protect our Sunspot and whatnot. Mysterio kind of keeps him guessing, and we can use the Mysterio clones as free Valkyrie fodder, which is nice. Storm helps us lock down a lane early on, and things like Juggernaut and Thor help us follow up, closing out that lane. And then Jane is really good because not only does she draw our Thor hammer, but she gets us our Wasp. Wasp is really nice in this deck because we need stuff to play with Valkyrie on the final turn a lot of the time. So the fact that we have a bunch of 1-drops available and even a free card sometimes can be very, very clutch for winning games. This deck definitely takes a bit to getting used to, as it does not really play like a lot of other decks in the game, as you do not want initiative if you want to be going for the Valkyrie win. But once you get the hang of it, I think it is a very powerful and very fun option. So those are all the decks we have for the Hot Location Hala. If there are any decks or cards you think work well with this location, let me know in the comments below. Again, this will be live for the next day, showing up at a 60% appearance rate. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.